Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let the record reflect that it is now approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. It's time for us to reconvene our trial of the two cases previously mentioned. The parties are both present. Their representatives are present. The representatives for the state are present. We had yesterday, and before we begin, I just want to give a brief introduction here. We had yesterday proffered the testimony of a witness, Lynne Blake, and the purpose of that proffer was to determine general admissibility and to anticipate what could be statements that may be inadmissible, and therefore to determine that level of admissibility prior to the time that these matters were put before the jury, so that we would not have a situation where the jury was tainted or exposed to evidence that was improper. During the testimony of Ms. Blake yesterday, I recall, well, to back up, there were a number of instances of the testimony that referred to things that were said, matters, items that were stated in her presence by both Mr. Cooper and Ms. Tobie. There were other matters that she testified to that had to do with conduct that could be interpreted as evidentiary, of evidentiary value. Virtually everything that she talked about, with the exception of the payment portion and mentioning to, I think she referenced that, according to her testimony, Ms. Tobie mentioned that she had to get some money somehow to Mr. Cooper. Outside of that, virtually everything that I heard was subject to an analysis for hearsay purposes of 90.803(18)A, the garden variety admission exception to the hearsay rule. None of those statements, with the last part of it that I mentioned, would even require an analysis under 90.803(18)E. I was pointed toward the three cases last night, and those were Foster versus State, Christie versus State, and Romani versus State. I've read all of those cases. I have done the analysis that I think is appropriate under those cases, and what I see here is that 18E is a special hearsay exception rule that applies to something different, something more isolated than 18A, and that if a statement is admissible under 18A, it's admissible, and we don't have to go any further than that to do the analysis. So that is going to be my outlook on this, and I understand that counsel has to protect the record, and if you wish to do so and to interpose your objections, please do so on whatever basis you wish, but please state only the legal basis. Don't get into a speaking objection, as I asked before. And my ruling is going to be consistent with what I have just said about my view of the evidence code. Yes, sir.
In that regard, Your Honors, just for the record, when I object on hearsay, it's going to go to the underpinnings of the hearsay exceptions, which is reliability. All of the exceptions to the hearsay rule hinge, they stand or fall, on reliability. There's something inherent in the nature of each hearsay exception that goes to the reliability of that exception.
That's correct.
Yes, sir.
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you, sir. And our position is that this witness is so incredible and has such little regard for the truth that she is totally unreliable. And therefore, she's deserving of no exception to anything except for absolute scrutiny.
Okay. Your Your observation in that regard is noted for the record, but it'll be the position of the court unless she's competent from a legal standpoint. That is to say, she's 18 years of age, she speaks the language, she meets all of the minimum qualifications, she seems to understand the question, she seems to respond in an appropriate manner, and by that I mean that her answers are consistent with the questions set. She gives the appearance of being competent. Now, as to the weight of her testimony, that's a different matter. That's something I'm sure that you will go into it in length in your cross-examination. But as far as the admissibility threshold, that's going to be the court's ruling. Mr. Davis, Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Dowdy, Ms. Quarles, anything else?
Judge, one other thing on your ruling this morning. I understand the ruling, and I certainly respect it. You did go ahead, though, and say that you understood that we would object if we felt it necessary during the testimony of Ms. Blake.
Sure.
And my understanding is there's a new provision in the evidence code that does not require that based on the court's ruling.
Well, again, that's up to you. And all I'm saying is if you feel that it is in your client's interest to do that, I'm not going to cut you off. All I would ask is that you state the legal objection. It is true that when a ruling's been made with a new provision under the evidence code, that it doesn't have to keep going back and keep going back to it. Once it's been made clear on the record that that's the objection. Anything else, Ms. Case? I think I left you out of that.
Yes, sir.
That asking? Okay, then is there anything further that we need to discuss before bringing in the jury?
Yes, sir. What I'd like to do, just to be safe, if it's all right, is just step back, Ms. Blake, remind her of the in limites about, first of all, about Mr. Cooper having recently been released from prison. So I want to reemphasize that. Something came up about a statement by Ms. Tobie about that someone owed Mr. Cooper a favor. We talked about that yesterday, that speculation, and even Ms. Blake said she didn't know where that came from, who said that. I agreed I wouldn't get into it. I just want to remind her. I just want to remind her not to, I don't want that to be blurted out. So I just wanted to, if I can step in real quick, remind her of those in limites.
Go ahead. And she's not going to be brought out in handcuffs, too. For the record, it appears now that the entire jury is seated and ready to go. Once again, for the record, the parties present, their representatives are present. We are continuing with the evidentiary portion of our trial this morning. And Mr. Davis, do you have another witness to call?
Yes, sir. On the state calls Lynne Blake.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and help you God? I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Blake, please tell us your full name.
Lynn Marie Blake,
How old are you?
58.
Are you currently housed in the Volusia County facility jail?
Yes, I am.
And have you been in jail since your arrest back on October the 8th of 2004?
Yes, sir.
That's been continuous custody since that time?
Yes, sir.
Are you employed?
No, sir.
Were you employed before you went to jail?
Yes and no.
Well, explain that.
I was asked to be a driver for Karen and also to help out Lewis, and that was in exchange for rent, so it was like a job
Other than that, did you have any full-time employment or anything other than
No,
what you
sir.
mentioned? Were you collecting any type of Social Security or disability, anything along those lines?
Yes, sir. I was collecting disability.
For what?
For I have post-polio.
Okay, will you speak up a little bit or move closer? There's a microphone there. You might just move closer. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have post-polio.
What effect does that have on you?
Well, eventually I will be back in a wheelchair. It's a residual effect from the polio that I had at the age of 4.
And that's something you were collecting disability for?
Yes, sir.
Do you know Karen Tobie?
Yes, sir.
Approximately when did you first meet Karen Tobie?
It's been now about 13 years ago.
And what were the general circumstances you met her? I don't need real detail, but just how was it you came about that you met her?
She came down with a friend of mine from New Jersey during Bike Week, and then she and him left. They went back to New Jersey, and then she called me on the phone and asked me if she could come and stay.
And then after that, did she actually move to Daytona Beach?
Yes, sir.
Did you become close friends with her after she moved to Daytona Beach?
Yes, sir.
Did you live close by to her?
She lived with me originally.
And then at some point, did you live close by in a trailer park?
Yes, sir.
And this was all, just to make clear, this was all before she even began dating John Cataneo?
Yes, sir.
Did you remain friends with her after she began dating Mr. Cataneo and even after she married Mr. Cataneo?
Yes, sir.
And now with regard to John Cataneo, did you know him?
Yes, sir.
How did you meet him?
I met him through Karen.
Is that when she started dating him?
Yes, sir.
And then did there come a time when Karen Tobie and Mr. Cataneo married?
Yes, sir.
Now, around that time, when they were dating and when they married, did there come a time when Miss Tobie moved from the trailer park and moved over to 319 Center Avenue?
Yes, sir.
Was that before or after she married Mr. Cataneo?
Before.
And did she live with him in the letter A duplex at 319?
Yes, sir.
Did there come a time when you moved over to that duplex?
Yes, sir.
And where did you move into in the duplex?
I moved into side B.
And just to make clear, we've heard testimony, side B, as you're facing the residence from the road, side B would be on the left-hand side. Is that right, where you live?
Actually, it's on the right hand. Oh, facing the road.
Yeah, no, if you're standing in the road.
Okay, it
and
would be
you're
on your
looking
left.
there,
Yes,
B
sir.
is where you live is on the left-hand side, is that right?
Correct.
And then A, where Mr. Cataneo and Karen Tobie lives on the right side.
Yes, sir.
If you're looking from the street.
Yes, sir.
Did Mr. Cataneo and Ms. Tobie get married in September of 2000?
Yes, they did.
And at some point after they got married, did they have a child by the name of Lewis?
Yes, they did.
And is it correct the month and year October of 2002? Is that when Lewis was born?
Yes, sir.
Explain the circumstances leading up to Lewis's birth. I mean, were you involved in Karen's pregnancy and decisions and assisting her during that time that she was pregnant with Lewis?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, explain that.
The deal was I moved into side B. I drove Karen whenever she needed to go for her doctor's appointments or wherever she needed to go. And I was to be there basically on call.
Were you excited that Karen was going to have a child?
Yes, sir.
Prior to that time, did you think that she would be able to have children?
No, sir.
With regard to driving Ms. Tobie around and taking her places and assisting her. Is that something that was that only during the pregnancy, or did you do that the entire time you lived there?
The whole time.
You mentioned this earlier, but I just want to make clear, you lived in that residence without paying rent, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was there some understanding, agreement that you would do the things you mentioned, help care for Lewis and assist Ms. Tobie?
Well, yes. Originally, I was giving him $200 a month, and then John said that, you know, I was helping him just do some filing and stuff in the office, so then they just dropped it.
Filing in his plumbing
Yes,
office?
sir.
So you originally were paying rent, and then you stopped after you started helping him out more a little bit with the business?
Yes, sir.
With regard to Mr. Cataneo's business, how involved were you with the business? I mean, would you work there full-time, or explain what you would do?
I probably maybe once a week spent maybe 2 hours. That's about it.
And basically, what would you do there?
Just filing and you know, just straightening up the office.
And going back to the time period, going into 2004 timeframe, the February to June timeframe back of 2004, approximately, if you recall, how many employees, I know it might have varied, but approximately how many employees did Mr. Cataneo have during that general timeframe?
During that time, I think there was only 3. I'm not positive. There could have been 4, but I think there were for sure for 3.
Was his son, Chuck Cataneo, working for him?
Yes, sir.
Was Tysjohaun Cooper working for him?
Yes, sir.
And then was there someone else named Pete or someone else who was working during part of that time?
Yes, sir.
Did Karen Tobie have a certain type of lifestyle that she lived?
Yes.
Did she drink?
Yes, she did.
Did she drink regularly?
Yeah, pretty regularly.
Such as, I mean, I'm going back to the time frame of February through June time frame, but how, would she drink every day?
Actually, no.
Would she sometimes drink in the morning?
Not very frequently.
What was her drink of choice that you saw?
Beer.
Even when she was drinking beer, was she able to function? I mean, from what you saw, I mean, would she be able to talk, communicate, shop, do things like that?
Yes, sir.
Would you see her on a daily basis?
Yes, sir.
Did you see John on a daily basis?
Yes, sir.
Did you see Lewis on a daily basis?
Yes, sir.
And did there come a time in the May, June timeframe when Phyllis Cataneo, John's mother, came and stayed, sometimes began staying at the residence there of Mr. Cataneo?
Yes, sir.
Into 2004, will you tell us from what you saw how John Cataneo and Karen Tobie's relationship was?
Well, it used to be pretty good, but it started deteriorating. Karen had told me that John had grabbed her by her hair and slung her around in their home, and that it also happened at one of their friends' houses.
Did you witness them arguing more frequently?
Yes, sir.
Was there arguing at all that you witnessed or heard about with regard to Karen's drinking and not caring for Lewis, type of things like that?
Not specifically.
Was Karen drinking regularly during that time frame of the February through June time frame?
Yes, sir.
And during that time frame, did you, and I just want to make clear, did you continue to assist Ms. Tobie and assist in caring for Lewis as you had been, as you testified earlier?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to take you Ms. Blake, let me just back up. I want to get a little more background. I'm sorry. Were you married at that time in the February through June of 2004 timeframe?
No, sir.
Had you been married?
Yes, sir.
And who had you been married to?
Mr. Ron Blake,
And how long had you been married to Mr. Blake?
29 years.
When did you, I assume you got a divorce from him?
Yes, sir.
And when did you get the divorce?
I don't even remember. It's been about 6 years ago.
So if we're going back to 2004, you've been divorced about 4 years or so?
Yes, sir.
And what city did he live in at that time?
Ormond Beach?
Did you still maintain contact with him?
Yes, sir.
And when I'd say maintain contact, did you have a relationship with him at all, or did you just would speak to him regularly?
He would come over frequently, and I would cook, a meal for him. And he'd, hang around for a while, but no relations.
Now I'd like to take you to February of 2004, around Valentine's Day. Did something occur that from your discussions of what you saw upset Ms. Tobie?
Yes, sir.
Explain that.
John had promised to buy Karen a bracelet, and he didn't come through with it.
Did that upset Ms. Tobie?
Yes, sir.
Did she make statements to you to that effect?
Yes, sir.
Was there anything going on around that time with regard to Lewis or plans that the family had made with regard to any event upcoming?
Yes, sir.
And explain that, please.
They were going to have a family reunion up in some little town in Georgia.
Were there any concerns that you had or any discussions you had with Ms. Tobie about Lewis in relation to that trip?
Yes, sir.
And what was that?
Mr. Cataneo had said to me personally that Lewis would not be coming back home, that he was going to be going to live in New York with his sister.
And did you mention this to Ms. Tobie?
She had mentioned it to me also.
All right. So he told that to you, but Ms. Tobie also said the same thing to you?
Yes, sir.
Did that concern you?
Yes, sir.
Were you close to Lewis?
Very close.
Did Ms. Tobie express concerns to you about the fact that might happen?
Yes, sir.
With regard to the relationship, was this one of the times in February when things were rocky between them?
Yes, sir.
With all this going on?
Yes, sir.
Did Ms. Tobie mention to you around this time frame about wanting to kill her husband?
Yes, sir.
And explain what she said and how that came up?
She said that she was tired of him bullying her and throwing her around and beating on her, and it was time for him to die.
Did she explain to you or start doing anything to follow through on saying that it's time for him to die?
Yes, I drove her around looking for a gun.
Did she make it clear to you what she wanted that gun for?
Yes, sir.
And what was that for?
To kill John.
Where did you drive her around?
We went to a bar called Rousey's, and also to a carpet business, and I think it's in Holly Hill still. I'm not sure.
When you drove to those places, what was the purpose of your driving, Ms. Tobie?
She had went in to speak to different people about obtaining a gun.
Did you go inside these places when she went in to try to get a gun?
No, sir.
Approximately how many times did you drive her around and she went in somewhere looking for a gun, approximately?
Approximately 7 or 8 times.
When she would go in, would she speak to you when she came out about her efforts and whether she's successful or whether she got one, things along those lines?
Yes, sir.
And was she successful at all at that point? And I'm going to move forward later, but at that point in getting a gun from the bar or from the carpet place?
No, sir.
Did she tell you whether she spoke to when she went into a Fred White?
Yes, sir.
And did you know Fred White?
Yes, sir.
Had you met him before?
Yes, sir.
And was he a frequent patron of one of the bars?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to take you to early April timeframe. At that point, was there some work done on Mr. Cataneo's yard, laying sod, something to that effect?
Yes, sir.
Who was over there doing that, as best you recall?
It was John, Tysjohaun, I believe Chuck was there, and there was another young man there. I don't remember his name.
Now, at that time, when that event was occurring, was, to your knowledge, based on discussions, you said you saw Ms. Tobie on a daily basis, was she still looking for a gun and talking about trying to get a gun?
Yes, sir.
At some point when the sod was being laid back in early April, did you see her talking to Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
And by her, I mean Ms. Tobie.
Yes, sir.
Now, did you know Mr. Cooper at that point? Know who he was?
No, sir.
Did you come to know who he was as time went on?
Yes, sir.
Where is it? Did you see them talking to each other one time or different times during that day while the sod's being laid?
One time.
Did you hear what they talked about? Could you hear their conversation?
Yes, sir.
Explain where you were and where they were when you heard this conversation.
In my side, the duplex, in the master bedroom, there are two like sliding glass doors. That I used as my craft room, and I usually sit there right in front of the window and I sew. I have my sewing machine set up, and I was in there at that time, sewing.
And where was Miss Tobie and Mr. Cooper?
Directly outside of my door, on the deck, I guess you call it.
Now, you mentioned other people being present, working on this project. When you heard this conversation, was anybody in the immediate vicinity of you and Mr. Cooper and Miss Tobie?
No, sir.
And explain the conversation you heard, what was spoken between Miss Tobie and Mr. Cooper?
She was asking him, you know.
Objection, hearsay, inherent unreliability.
Would you state that question again and to get her answer?
Yeah, I just want to know what conversation you overheard between Miss Tobie and Mr. Cooper.
Okay.
Your objection's noted and it's overruled. Go ahead.
Karen was just speaking with him, and it was just general conversation, and then she had mentioned if he knew how to get a gun.
And what was his response to that?
Yes, he could get her a gun.
Did he question her as to why she wanted a gun?
Yes, sir.
And what did she say?
To kill her husband.
Did he ask at all why or anything, ask any questions about why she wanted to kill him?
Yes, sir.
And what was Miss Tobie's response?
She showed him the enormous bruise that was on her chest.
When she say showed it, how did she show it? I mean, what she...
She just pulled her shirt to where he could see the bruise.
And what did Mr. Cooper say that he could get her a gun?
Yes, sir.
And did you have conversations after that time with Miss Tobie about the fact that Mr. Cooper had agreed to get her a gun?
Yes, sir.
Did you do anything, drive Ms. Tobie anywhere, do anything with regard to following up on Mr. Cooper getting her a gun?
Yes, sir.
And what is it that you did?
Objection, in terms of relevancy, can we have a time? We've not heard a month of the year.
I think that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Well, we did have it, Your Honor, and I'll go back and we'll go over it again. This is early April time frame when the
Yes.
sod was...
Objection leading.
Well, Judge, she's already said it. She's testified.
You said early time frame, but a year would be good, just for the record.
Is this 2004?
Yes, sir.
And just to make clear during my questions, this is all 2004 timeframe, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you understand me earlier when I was talking about between February and June of 2004?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to timeframes and months, is it easy for you to think back now and remember exact months at all?
Sometimes and sometimes not.
Hold on a second.
overruled. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sometimes and sometimes not. I'm not exact.
With regard to time frames and certain events, have you had discussions with law enforcement, with me, with regard to certain events that occurred during that time frame?
Yes, sir.
Were you told or explained that with regard to the dates and times of the sod laying event
Yes, sir.
at the house?
Yes, sir.
So I take it if that's early April of 2004, then you did have conversations after that with Ms. Tobie about the fact that Mr. Cooper would get her a gun?
Yes, sir.
And then after that time, did you drive her around in relation to Mr. Cooper's attempt to get a gun?
Yes, sir.
And obviously that would have been at a time after the conversation.
Leading, obviously.
Sustained. It's technical, but it's sustained.
Was that after the sod laying incident?
Yes, sir.
And explain what you did after that, what occurred with regard to you assisting in that endeavor.
We would drive by the plumbing business to see if Mr. Cooper was there.
And when you say drive by the business, what business are you talking about?
Cataneo Plumbing.
And explain, when you drove by the business, would you always see him when you drove by the business?
No.
Are there times when you did see him and there was a conversation that you heard?
Yes, sir.
And explain what conversations you heard, either between yourself or Ms. Tobie and Mr. Cooper in connection with him obtaining a gun.
Basically, it was, have you gotten anything yet? And it was no.
When you saw Mr. Cooper during this time, if you drive by and see him, would there always be a conversation with him?
No.
If there wasn't a conversation, what would occur if he saw you and you and Ms. Tobie saw him?
If somebody else was around, he would basically gesture, not yet. He would just shake his head, put his hands up and say, not yet.
Okay. And what did you understand that to mean yourself?
That he had not obtained a gun. Was there ever a phone call by Mr. Cooper to you in relation to the gun? Yes, sir.
And obviously, that was after the April sod incident?
Yes, sir.
And what did Mr. Cooper say with relation to obtaining a gun?
That he still was still looking and that he hadn't yet obtained one.
Did he call you at your house?
Yes, sir.
Approximately, at this point, let me ask you, eventually was a gun obtained for Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
From the time that he agreed to get a gun when the sod was being laid up, from that time until the gun was obtained, about how many times did you drive by the shop attempting to talk to Mr. Cooper?
Between 10 and 12 times.
And of those times, approximately how many times did you actually stop and there was some conversation with yourself or Ms. Tobie with regard to whether he'd gotten one yet?
Between 5 and 6 times.
Is that an estimate?
Yes, sir.
Were you taking notes at the time, writing in a diary or doing anything to reflect and pinpoint the date, time, and number of times?
No, sir.
Between the time that Mr. Cooper agreed to obtain a gun and the gun was actually obtained from him, between that time, was there discussion about how much money Mr. Cooper would receive in order to get a gun?
Yes, sir.
And who was that discussion between?
Objection, hearsay, inherent unreliability.
We haven't actually got to the question yet, but I'll reserve ruling on that until we actually get to the question.
Were you present for the conversation about the price of obtaining a gun?
Yes, sir.
And who was that conversation between?
Karen and Tysjohaun
Where was that conversation?
at the shop.
And were you standing right there when the conversation was between them? Or explain where you were and where they were.
I was in the car, but they were standing outside the car.
And could you hear what they were saying?
Yes, sir.
And what was their conversation with regard to the price of the gun?
It started out as Tysjohaun had said, if I get you a gun and you kill your husband, I'm not going to have a job. And he said that, and then there was a little, and I can't remember exactly the exact words, but then he said he would like to be able to go to a truck driving school to get his CDL license so that he could work with his father. And he mentioned that cost $1,800. But then if he had $1,800, then he wouldn't be able to make his rent. So they kind of firmed it up, and they decided the 18 plus 2 months rent, and it came to $3,000.
As for the objection, it's overruled.
Did you hear Karen Tobie agree to pay him $3,000 for him obtaining a gun?
Yes, sir.
After this conversation and before the gun was obtained from Mr. Cooper, were you with Ms. Tobie when she went and got money for the purpose of paying for the gun?
Yes, sir.
Did you drive her to a certain location?
Yes, sir.
Where'd you drive her?
The Bank of America on Nova and Hand.
And did you know what she was going there for?
Yes, sir.
Did she tell you why she was going there?
Yes, sir.
And what was the purpose of going there?
To get the money to pay Tysjohaun for the gun.
And I'm sorry, to pay Tysjohaun for the gun?
Yes, sir.
Did you go inside the bank with Karen Tobie when she went to Bank of America?
I'm sorry. No, sir.
Where were you?
I was in the car with Lewis.
When, I take it Karen Tobie went inside the bank, you waited in the car?
Yes, sir.
When she came back out, did she tell you anything with regard to the transaction that occurred?
Yes, sir.
What'd she tell you?
That she was not able to obtain the whole $3,000.
And did she tell you how much she was able to obtain?
Yes, sir.
How much did she say she was able to obtain?
She was able to get $2,000 on one credit card and $700 on another.
Now, originally, when you're questioned months later by the police, was there a question in your mind whether it was a total of $2,300 or $2,700?
Yes, sir. I wasn't sure.
And did she say how many credit cards she took that off of, that total?
Yes, sir.
Objection, hearsay, and inherent unreliability. If I may have a standing objection, I won't continually interrupt. I apologize.
Thank you.
I think that's appropriate.
On
And
the grounds that it's hearsay, inherently unreliable, and we're not able to cross-examine anything that Ms. Tobie may have said. Thank you.
the objection is noted and it's overruled. And for the record, the standing objection to of that general nature is acceptable.
Thank you very much.
And again,
And for your clients too.
Join on his behalf.
All right, let the record reflect that both defendants have joined in that objection.
did she say how many credit cards she used in this transaction?
Yes, you did.
How many?
2.
What was done with that money after it was received from the bank?
It was left in my care.
Did you hold the money?
Yes.
At some point after making that withdrawal on the credit, or Mr. Tobie making that and telling you what she had done, and you holding the money, at a point after that, did you receive a phone call, or someone received a phone call or not from Mr. Cooper?
Karen came to my door on the phone, and she said that we have to go to Sears or in the Volusia Mall to meet Tysjohaun.
And is that what you did?
Yes, sir.
Can you give an estimate of how long that was from when you got the money out of the bank? I mean, in terms of days approximately?
Approximately a week.
And did you go to the Volusia Mall behind Sears?
Yes, I did.
How'd you get there?
I drove.
Who was with you in the car?
Karen and Lewis.
Where was Karen sitting?
She was sitting in the passenger seat in the front.
And where was Lewis sitting?
He was in the back seat behind me.
When you got to the mall, did you eventually see Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
Was he in a car?
Yes, sir.
Was there anybody else with him in the car?
There was a woman with him.
Did you know this woman?
No, sir.
Was it a black female?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any conversations with this woman at all?
No, sir.
Did this woman ever get out of the car that Mr. Cooper was in?
No, sir.
Was Mr. Cooper driving his car?
Yes, sir.
Or the car that he was in?
Yes, sir.
And where was this woman sitting in the car?
She was sitting in the front passenger seat.
And you're driving the car. Did you pull up next to his car?
No, sir.
Did he pull up next to your car?
Yes, sir.
At some point where your cars next to each other?
Yes, sir.
Did anyone get out of the car and go anywhere?
Yes.
Who got out?
Tysjohaun.
When he got out of his car, where did he go?
He came over to the passenger side of our vehicle.
And what did he do once he got there?
Karen told him to get into the back seat.
Did he do that?
Yes, sir.
When he got in the back seat, did he give anything to anybody?
Yes, he handed the gun to Karen.
And what did Karen do with the gun?
She held it and she asked him if he had any, there was any ammunition, and he said yes, it's fully loaded.
Was anything given to Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
Who gave something to Mr. Cooper?
I handed him the bank envelope that had the money in it.
And that's the bank envelope with the money that you testified about earlier at the bank transaction at Bank of America?
Yes, sir.
After the money was given to Mr. Cooper, what did he do at that time?
He exited the vehicle and went back to his car.
And what did you do at that point?
We left.
What kind of gun? Did you see the gun after it was obtained? Did you see the gun and can describe it as best you can?
It was a small caliber silver handgun.
Did you or Ms. Tobie, in your presence, do anything with regard to testing the gun to see
Yes,
if it
sir.
worked?
Yes, sir.
When was that done?
I believe it was the very next day. We took a drive out on State Road 40 and pulled off in the Ocala Forest
What was the purpose of going out there?
to test the gun.
Did you have a discussion with Ms. Tobie about that being the purpose to go out there to test the gun?
Yes, sir.
Was Lewis with you?
Yes, sir.
See in the back in his car seat?
Yes, sir.
And what was done when you went out to the Ocala National Forest?
Karen fired the gun.
Did you drive and park off of a road or something? What
Yes,
type
sir.
of, was it a paved road or dirt road?
Dirt road.
And what happened once the car was parked and who did what at that time?
I had yelled out to her, any time now,
Any time now, meaning what?
shoot it so we can get the heck out of there.
Did you hear a gunshot?
Yes, sir.
After hearing the gunshot, did Ms. Tobie come back to the car?
Yes, sir.
Did you actually see her fire the gun or did you just hear the gunshot?
I just heard the gunshot.
When she came back, did she say anything about the condition or working order of the gun?
Yes, sir.
What'd she say?
She said that it had jammed on her and she had to drop the clip and reinsert it and then fire it.
What was her attitude toward the gun not working?
She was upset that she had just given, well, now $2,700 and the gun did not work properly.
At some point, from that point later, were any statements made by her about how she would have to use this gun to kill her husband?
Yes, sir.
What'd she say?
She said that it would be kind of hard to come up behind him and tell him, oh, hold on a minute while I drop the clip and then reinsert it so I can kill you.
After she fired it and came back and told you about that, did you leave that area and then return back to your residence?
Yes, sir.
What was done with the gun from that point on?
It was left in my care.
Where did you keep it?
I had it in my jewelry box.
Were there any attempts to reconnect with Mr. Cooper about talking about the condition of the gun?
Yes, sir.
And how was that done? What was done in that regard?
We had spoken to him up at the shop again and told him that it didn't work, and he said that there was nothing he could do about it.
What became of that gun?
I disposed of it.
And how did you dispose of it?
I took it to the Halifax River, and I threw it into one of the canals.
That's a canal off the Halifax River?
Yes, sir.
What general area was that in?
It's in Ormond, I guess it's between, it's by the Tomoka Park. That's all I can say.
Is that north of Holly Hill, Ormond
Yes.
Beach region?
Yes.
And what'd you do? Explain, was the gun in anything, first of all?
Yes, I had it in a baggie the whole time.
And why was that?
I didn't want to touch it.
Did it stay in the baggie when you threw it away?
No.
Explain how it is you threw it away. You drove there. Was Karen with you, Tobie?
Yes.
Was Lewis with you?
Yes, sir.
And what'd you do? You drove your car there and explain what you did.
We pulled off the side of the road, and I parked. I got out. I opened up the baggie. I held on to the baggie, and I threw it toward the gun. And the clip just went two separate directions.
Did it go in the water?
Yes, sir.
Was the water close by to the road?
Fairly close.
At a later time, did you take the police to the general area where you had thrown the gun?
Yes, sir.
By the time you took the police to show them where he'd thrown the gun, had hurricanes passed through the area?
Yes, sir.
How many hurricanes had passed through?
3.
When the gun was disposed of around that time frame, did you have any discussions with Ms. Tobie, or did she say anything with regard to any other ideas she had or what you want to do with regard to killing her husband?
She said that she was going to have to find somebody else to do it because she couldn't do it.
Your Honor, again, just for record purposes, for clarity, continue our objection. We move that be stricken. The statement that Ms. Tobie said, we move to be stricken on the grounds that it's hearsay, inherently unreliable, denies my client the right to cross-examine. We now renew our motion to sever because of this testimony. We cannot confront and cross-examine Ms. Tobie about what this lady's saying that she said.
We have essentially two motions here. One is a motion, well, we have three. We have an objection on hearsay grounds. That's overruled. We have a motion to strike. That's overruled. And we have a motion to sever. I said overruled on the motion to strike. I meant denied on the motion to strike, and the motion to sever is denied this time.
So you're going to take it there's no more standing objection at all? I thought just 5 minutes ago we were saying there's a standing objection to this and defense counsel stated, and I want to just
Mr. Davis, we'll handle that as it comes up.
Okay.
I was concerned about...
Mr. Mott, we'll handle that as it comes up. As I've said before, all lawyers should represent their clients in the best way that they can.
Thank you.
When the statements made about Ms. Tobie needing to find someone else to kill her husband, was there some event coming, a deadline in your mind coming up?
Yes, sir.
And what was that?
It had to be before the 1st of July.
And what was happening then?
The whole family would have been meeting together for the family reunion up in Georgia.
And is that the event you talked about earlier, that when Mr. Cataneo, you said, had said about taking Lewis up there? Is that the same event that you're referring to earlier?
Yes, sir.
Now, around this time frame, as it got closer into later in the June time frame, are plans being made for the trip? In other words, people talking about it, family members, and discussing the trip to Georgia?
Yes, sir.
At a point after disposing of the gun and after Miss Tobie telling you she needed to find someone else to kill her husband, were you present for a conversation between Miss Tobie and Mr. Cooper at the shop?
Yes, sir.
Explain what you saw and what you heard at the shop with regard to Miss Tobie's plans that she talked to you about.
I was inside the shop, which faces a small parking area. The front door was open and the windows were open. Karen was outside talking with Tysjohaun, I guess, about the gun situation, and then she said that she was going to have to find somebody to kill John because she couldn't do it. And then Tysjohaun had made some gesture with his hand over his left chest area, saying that I'm your man.
And did you hear that or see his mouth? Explain where you were. Could you actually hear it, or did you see his mouth say, "I'm your man"? Explain that.
I saw his mouth say that.
And did you clearly in your mind, is that what he's saying? I'm the man.
Yes, sir.
Could you hear all the conversation from where you were? I mean, word for word, everything being said.
No, sir.
After that conversation, did Ms. Tobie come back and make a statement to you at that
Yes,
point?
sir.
And what did she say to you?
She said,
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Overruled at this point, although I'll listen to the answer.
What did she say to you?
she said, my problems are over.
And did she say why she said that? My problems are what she said?
Yeah, she said that Tysjohaun said that he was going to kill him for her.
Your Honor, that's for my objection.
Yes, the ruling on the objection as to what Ms. Tobie said is overruled with regard to the second part of it involving Mr. Cooper. That is sustained for the moment until further ruling under 903, 90.803, 18E. Go ahead. There's been no ruling sought in that.
Well, it has. It's been sustained. So I need to, apparently, Your Honor, has sustained the ruling. So I need to, I might need to approach sidebar.
Yes, let's. Because of a ruling made by the court, the objection that had been sustained previously, that ruling is now changed, and the objection to that is overruled based upon the ruling of the court made at sidebar.
Yes.
So, Ms. Blake, upon seeing what and seeing what you testified to and seeing the words being mouthed, Ms. Tobie came back and said her problems were over, that Mr. Cooper was going to, or Tysjohaun was going to kill Mr. Cataneo.
Yes, sir.
After Ms. Tobie told you that, did you have discussions with her about the murder of her husband and when it would happen and things to that effect?
Yes, we discussed it. It had to happen before the 1st of July.
And that's for the reasons that you've already discussed.
Yes, sir.
After that time, the incident at the shop that you just testified about, did you drive by the shop with Ms. Tobie after that time?
Yes, sir.
And what was the purpose of driving by the shop?
We were trying to locate Tysjohaun to ask him when it was going to happen.
Approximately how many times you drive by the shop looking for him to ask him this and find out when it would happen?
About 4 or 5 times.
And did you have any conversations, or did Ms. Tobie have any conversations with Mr. Cooper in your presence about this subject?
Yes, sir. There were several occasions when we actually made contact with him, and we neither of us got out the vehicle, but we would motion him over to the vehicle.
And who first of all primarily talked to him, you or Ms. Tobie?
Karen did.
And what did she tell him?
When is this going to happen?
And what was his response?
He responded that he would more than likely do it over the 4th of July weekend because there would be enough noise to cover the sound of the shots.
Now, was that one conversation when that was mentioned to him about him doing it on the 4th of July?
Yes, sir.
And because of the noise?
Yes, sir.
When he said that in the conversation, what was the response of Ms. Tobie?
It has to happen before then.
Did she tell him when it had to happen by?
Not at that point.
At any of these conversations you're talking about driving by, was the date made clear to him?
Yes, sir.
And who told him the date that it had to be by?
Karen told him.
At any point, did you hear a discussion between Ms. Tobie and Mr. Cooper about the price or how much she would pay him for killing her husband?
Yes, sir.
And where was this conversation?
This was at the shop.
How much did Ms. Tobie tell Mr. Cooper she would pay him for killing her husband?
$5,000.
Did she tell him where she would get the money from?
Yes, sir.
Where did she say she'd get the money from?
She said that she would pay him out of the money that she would get from the insurance money.
Did you know what she was talking about when she talked about the insurance money?
Yes, sir.
What was your knowledge in terms of an insurance policy between Mr. Cataneo and Ms. Tobie?
Mr. Cataneo had taken out a life insurance policy shortly after the birth of Lewis for $500,000.
And had you talked to Karen Tobie about the fact that there was a $500,000 insurance policy?
Yes, sir.
Did you have discussions with her about how that could be used or how well it could be used after the murder of her husband?
Yes, sir.
And what type of discussions did you have about that money?
Basically, that you can't raise a child on $500,000.
Did Ms. Tobie tell you she was expecting to get that, though, that money after her husband was killed?
Yes, sir.
Were you expecting her to get that after her husband was killed?
I wasn't really sure.
Did you talk to Ms. Tobie at all about plans after Ms. Cataneo was killed? In other words, what you all would do in terms of where you'd live and things like that?
Yes, sir.
And explain how that conversation went with Ms. Tobie?
Originally, Karen had wanted to sell the house, but then she had conversation with her father about the payoff, something about the payoff on the mortgage would be too costly. So we decided that we should stay there and get the house paid off, and then down the road maybe sell it and then find another house.
And these were discussions you were having of what you all would do after Ms. Cataneo was killed?
Yes, sir.
Did she express any concerns about being saddled with debt or anything by Mr. Cataneo?
Yes. During this time period, we were all going together, and John by himself looking at other houses.
And what did Ms. Tobie say about that? What her fear was?
That she would get stuck having to make the house payment, and there would go the money.
Excuse me. Now, we were talking about conversations that you and Ms. Tobie had with Mr. Cooper, and you mentioned about the 4th of July and needed to be done earlier than that.
Yes.
Were there other conversations about this having to have been done other than at the shop?
Yes, sir.
And where was that conversation?
There was one incident when Mr. Cooper had come to the house and he had to drop off some materials from Mr. Cataneo. And as he walked past my part of the duplex, we yelled at him, and then Karen told him it had to be done before the 1st.
And what did he say?
He said, "That's okay."
Now, did he mention something there, do you recall, about that he would want to do it on the 4th of July because of the noise or something to that effect?
No, I believe that was the previous time at the shop.
When you say you believe, are you certain?
I'm not positive.
All right. Was that comment made by Mr. Cooper about doing it on the 4th?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure in your mind whether it was at the shop or at the house?
I'm not positive.
During one of those, was it either at either place, either conversation at the shop or at the house?
Yes, sir.
Were there more than one conversations about this having to get done that you were there for between Ms. Tobie and Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
During any of these, did you express yourself that this had to get done sooner versus later, or sooner the better, something to that effect?
Yes, sir.
And explain how that came about.
When Karen told me it had to be done before the 1st, I said, yes, the sooner the better.
And you said that to Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
And what was his response?
He said, no problem.
And when you said to him, the sooner the better, what were you talking about? The sooner the better, what happened?
That he killed John.
And again, I want to make clear, and I asked you this earlier, but were you taking notes at the time in terms of dates and times and what was said at all?
No, sir.
Were you thinking that you had to remember all these things because you later be in a court of law 2.5 years later testifying?
No, sir.
The conversation you talked about when the July 1st deadline was emphasized to Mr. Cooper, approximately when was that before Mr. Cataneo was actually murdered, time-wise, approximately?
Approximately 1 week.
1 week before he was murdered?
Yes, sir.
During all these conversations that you either had with Mr. Cooper or heard between Ms. Tobie and Mr. Cooper, was a specific time ever stated by anyone as to when this would occur? When
Yes,
the
sir.
murder would happen, a specific time?
No, sir.
Did you know in your having in your mind a specific date or time when the murder was going to occur?
No, sir.
Did Ms. Tobie mention anything to you about there being a specific time or date in her mind that it would happen?
No, sir.
Did you ever have discussions with Ms. Tobie about wondering when it may happen?
Yes, sir.
And explain that.
We would be sitting around wondering, is this going to be the night?
And was it clear in these discussions to you in your mind, is this going to be a night that it was referring to her husband being killed?
Yes, sir.
Objection leading.
Overruled.
During this time frame from when the gun was obtained, the gun was thrown away, and Mr. Cooper agreed to kill Mr. Cataneo, during all the time frame you testified, was Karen Tobie living at 319 Center Avenue, Duplex A, with her husband?
Yes, sir.
And were they sharing a bedroom,
Yes, sir.
sharing a bed?
Yes, sir.
Objection, relevancy, move to be stricken.
I'm not going to strike it, but I'll sustain the objection.
You'd see them all on a daily basis, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And they were all living under the same roof, Mr. Cataneo and Ms. Tobie?
Yes, sir.
And as it got closer to the murder of Mr. Cataneo, was his mother there also under the same roof?
Yes, sir.
And was Lewis there also,
Yes, sir.
other than the times that he was with you?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to take you to the evening of June the 30th, Wednesday, around 9:30 or so in the evening. Did you hear something, hear some sounds that caught your attention?
Yes, sir.
And what did you hear?
Well, earlier in the evening, all the neighborhood children had been setting off fireworks, firecrackers, and then I heard a succession of 5 shots, or 5 pops. actually.
And do you know, I mean, did you count them? Do you know if there were 4 or 5? Do you know the exact number offhand?
It was 5.
Did you count them, or is that just your
It just,
best in
I heard
recollection?
pop, 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 pop.
And what were you doing when you heard these pops?
I was sitting in my living room watching television.
And as you're looking at the television, are you facing out toward the street, or which direction are you facing?
No, my back was to the street.
Was your window open?
Yes, sir.
Did you notice anything unusual or strange before hearing the pops, other than, as you said, having heard firecrackers, but anything else unusual or odd?
No, sir.
Did you even hear a knock on the door next door at all?
No, sir.
Had you earlier been on the phone with your husband?
Yes, sir. Ex-husband.
I'm sorry, your ex-husband. And had you hung up before the time that you heard these pops?
Yes, sir.
After hearing those pops, did you receive a phone call?
Yes, sir.
But when you received the phone call, were you still sitting there in front of the television?
Yes, sir.
And who was the telephone call from?
I'm not positive whether it was Miss Ann Cataneo or if it was Karen. I'm not sure.
But do you know it was one of the two that made a phone call to you?
Yes, sir.
And based on that phone call, what did you do?
They asked me if John was at my end of the residence, and I said no. And they said that he had walked out the door 10 or 15 minutes prior, and that they hadn't seen him, or
What
they
did you
didn't
do
know.
at that point?
I walked out to see if he was outside, and I saw him lying in front of his door.
Are you sure that someone mentioned 10 to 15 minutes, or do you know that that time was mentioned?
I'm not positive.
Based on that phone call, did you immediately go outside?
Yes, sir.
And where did you go when you went outside?
I went out out my front door over towards their front door.
Did you see anything in front of their front door?
Yes, sir.
And what did you see?
Saw Mr. Cataneo's body.
And was there blood around his body?
Yes, sir.
And did he appear to be alive at all to you?
He was temporarily.
When you say that, what do you mean by that?
When I came upon his body, I banged on the window and I told them to call 911 that John had been shot, and I heard him gasp his last breath.
Now, Miss Blake, you're not a medical doctor, are you?
No, sir.
I mean, do you know in detail the dying process and sounds and things the body makes? I mean, are you aware from directly, I mean, have you studied that as a doctor would have with regard to that process?
No, sir, but I have been present.
Present when someone died before?
Yes, sir.
All right. And that's what it appeared to you, is that he was taking his last breath?
Yes, sir.
All right. After banging on the window and yelling to call 911, where did you go from that point?
I ran back to my part of the duplex, and I ran out my back door because they could not open the door. I believe that Miss Ann Cataneo.
Well, I don't want you to conjecture or think about what happened.
Okay.
All right? We want you to talk about what you saw and
Okay.
what you heard.
Okay,
Where did you go?
Okay, I left him from in front of the Karen and John's part of the duplex. I ran back through my part of the duplex, through my back door, it's a sliding door, through their sliding door into their apartment.
So you went back through your front door and went around the back into the next door where Ms. Cataneo and Karen Tobie were?
Yes, sir.
And at some point, where did you all end up after that?
Back over at my part of the duplex.
But when you went over there, did you recall anyone talking on the phone or 911 dispatcher being on the phone?
Yes, sir.
We've heard that, but did you actually talk to dispatcher at some point also?
Yes, I did.
I take it that, did the police arrive shortly after the 911 call?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to the police when they arrived at some point?
Not right away, but yes, sir.
Did you talk to someone, police officer at the scene for a brief amount of time?
Yes, sir.
Were you eventually taken to another location and in order to be interviewed?
Yes, sir.
Was that the homicide investigative unit?
Yes, sir.
Was investigator Sean McGuire and Detective Joe Borelli present at that time?
Yes, sir. Actually, I don't think Borelli was there. I think it was another officer.
Okay, and that's fine. I take it through the next weeks and months you came to know Investigator McGuire, Detective Borelli, or did you, through their interviews of you?
Yes, sir.
Did you tell the police what you told us here today, that evening, about the events leading up to the murder?
No, I didn't.
Where did you go and stay after Mr. Cataneo was killed?
We were over a friend of John and Karen's. They wouldn't. They had told us to leave the house, so we had to leave.
And did you eventually leave the area?
Yes, sir.
Or where did you go?
We went to Seattle, Washington.
And who lives in Seattle? Is that a relative of yours or Miss Tobie's?
It's Karen's father.
And approximately when did you leave to go up there, if you recall?
I believe it was either July 8th or July 9th. I'm not positive.
So approximately a little over a week after the murder of Mr. Cataneo?
Yes, sir.
Did Miss Tobie mention anything to you about her going and attempting to get the insurance money or filling out paperwork, things of that effect?
She had done that prior to us leaving. She had
Leaving to Washington.
Right.
That's what I mean. Had she mentioned to you that she had done that in order to do what needed to be done in order to obtain the insurance money?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how long did you and Miss Tobie stay up in the Seattle, Washington area?
A little over a month.
Did the police come up and talk to you when you were there?
Yes, sir.
Eventually, did you and Miss Tobie come back to Volusia County?
Yes, sir.
Where did you stay when you came back?
We went back to the house.
Around that time frame when you came back, now if you stayed up there, I'm just doing them at 5 weeks or so, are we into August now when you came back?
Yes, sir.
Were there hurricanes that were beginning to occur around that time frame?
Yes, we got back to the house the day before Charlie hit.
And at some point, did you have to relocate, or did you relocate and make different living arrangements?
Yes, sir. It was, I believe it was just after the second hurricane hit, we had to go stay beachside because we had no power and they were not going to get it turned on for several days.
Now, in this time frame, I'm going to back up a little bit after Ms. Cataneo was killed, during the days and weeks after that, did you have discussions with Ms. Tobie about making the payment for the killing to Mr. Cooper?
Yes, sir.
And explain what conversations you had with her in that regard.
She didn't know how she was supposed to, she told me she didn't know how to contact him.
And did you have discussions about how it would happen if you contacted him, how you get the money to him, how you go about doing it?
She mentioned something like, what are we supposed to do, put it under a rock, you know, at a certain location or what? And I said, you're asking me, I have no way of knowing.
Did she make comments to you about the fact that, did she have to wait, according to what she told you, for the insurance money
Yes,
to
sir.
be paid before she could pay him?
Yes, sir.
And did you have any contact with Mr. Cooper after Mr. Cataneo was murdered?
One time.
And how'd that contact come about? Did you talk to him or just see him?
I spoke to him very briefly. I had went up to the shop with Mr. Tobie and Karen's sister Janet, and we were inside the shop when Tysjohaun came up.
Was there any conversation at all to note? I mean, was there any?
I just told him, thank you for coming by.
Was that before you and Ms. Tobie went up to Seattle?
Yes, before.
So that was in the week or so after the murder?
Yes, sir.
That Mr. Cooper was at the shop?
Yes, sir.
And you had this encounter. Other than that, did you see him at all after Mr. Cataneo was murdered?
No.
At some point, did you leave the motel and come back to your residence there on Center Avenue?
Yes, sir.
Did Ms. Tobie come back and live there?
For a while.
And when I say live there, was that with you or was that on her side?
On her side.
And was Lewis there at that time?
Yes, sir.
Did she remain there all the time or did she go other places periodically and stay?
She would go to other places periodically.
Do you know if she went back to the motel and hung out where she'd been staying?
Yes, sir.
To your knowledge, had she met other people that through staying at the motel?
Yes, sir.
And had you met certain people too?
Yes, sir.
Did you hang out with those people that you'd met?
No, sir.
But did you see Ms. Tobie hanging out with
Yes,
those
sir.
people? Would you go over there when she was at the motel?
Yes, sir.
Were any problems developing between you and Ms. Tobie with regard to her being at the motel, you being at the house, things along those lines?
Yes, sir.
In what regard?
Well, she would just take off, and then, like, I would have Lewis with me, and I would not have the keys to get his food, his clothing, his change of diapers, things of that nature, and that she would have to come back and bring me the keys.
Did you express your displeasure with her about her conduct?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, was she, or did you see her, was she partying or drinking a lot during that time frame?
Yes, sir.
Was she making statements or making comments about things related to her husband's death?
Yes, sir.
Did that concern you?
Yes, sir.
During that time frame when you're at the motel and you're back and the hurricanes are coming through, are the police still, are you talking to the police on various occasions during that time?
Yes, they asked us to come in to speak with them, I think on two different occasions.
And did you do so?
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to get into October, but the other times you talked to the police, did you tell them the truth at that time in terms of?
No, sir.
Mr. Davis, it's about 10:30, and I think it's appropriate here for a mid-morning break. We'll go until 10:45. Ladies and gentlemen, you may not discuss this case with anyone or amongst yourselves. You may not listen to or watch any media of any kind. You should not form an opinion or disposition on this case until you have heard all the evidence, the arguments, and the discussions on the law. Please turn your notepads over on your seats. Any further admonition for this jury before the break? No. The court's in recess till 10:45.